All right. Welcome again to people who just joined in. We have a lot of people here. I'm very excited to start this off. So yeah, National Indo-American Museum, we are now in a physical space in Lombard. I really want to encourage all of you to come visit us in our museum space any weekend that you're available, because we have a very special exhibition of 9 Indian American artists curated by Shaurya Kumar, from whom you will hear from very quickly in a minute. But I quickly want to also introduce what 𝐒𝐮𝐫𝐚𝐥 exhibition is about. 𝐒𝐮𝐫𝐚𝐥 is the art of the Indian diaspora, is a milestone for NIAM. Our inaugural exhibition under our own roof at the Umang and Paragi Patel Center in Lombard. The exhibition is supported by a generous grant from the National Endowment for the Arts and also matched by other donor organizations and individuals. Like I said, curated by Shaurya Kumar, Chair of Faculty and Associate Professor at the School of the Art Institute of Chicago. We are very honored to have him today. The exhibition includes 9 artists, like I said, that have kind of traversed international borders and have adopted the United States of America as their home. Like I said, the part of being a small shop, a small museum, is that we can offer personalized curated tours. And I would love to even myself take you around the museum gallery and introduce you to the artists and the artworks. Today, however, we have a special panel discussion, like I said, and I want to quickly add spotlight to our host and moderator for the day, Megha Ralapati. Megha, I'm going to ask you to unmute real quick, and I'm going to introduce Megha also. Megha is an independent curator, arts manager, and writer based in Chicago, where she oversees the Jackman Goldwasser Residency at Hyde Park Art Center. I'm definitely butchered the name of the residency, and I'm so sorry for that. Megha, tell us about your journey so far.
Oh, certainly. Thank you for having me. First of all, Jitesh, thank you for the introduction and thank you for the invitation. I'm very happy to be here. Good morning, everyone. I am an arts worker based in Chicago. I've been here for a number of years. I'm from Chicago originally. I work directly with artists. I'm very interested in developing and supporting individual artist practices, writing about it, contextualizing them, and doing much of the work that we do in our field to support the work of contemporary art practice.
Thank you so much, and welcome here. Before I hand it over to you quickly, I want to let everyone in the audience know that our chat is going to stay open for your questions, comments, suggestions, anything that you would like to communicate to our panelists today. To set things off, please type in the chat where you're joining us from today. From Chicago, outside of Chicago. I see some people even maybe from India. So please type in the chat box where you are from right now, and any questions that you have. Towards the end, we have a Q&A section that we will bring that up. Megha, you can take it over and you can introduce the first panelist.
Thank you so much. Thank you again. I'm happy to be part of this conversation. It's great to be able to think about this exhibition in dialogue with the curator and one of the artists. So we can spend a little bit of deeper time thinking about the context of the show, why it came about, and then looking specifically at one artist practice within a group show context. Hopefully you will all go away after this conversation with a deeper understanding of NIAM, the organization, this first inaugural exhibition, and in particular, the kind of interests and concerns of an exciting contemporary artist working today in the US. I'm first going to introduce my colleagues who will be talking with today. I am really happy to be part of this conversation. I've been aware of NIAM for many years now, since probably its first days of conversation and sort of the seeds planted for it to happen. I know it's been a labor of love and a long time in coming, so it's very exciting that the project has taken off and has a brick and mortar space now, which we invite everyone to be able to visit when they have a chance. And for sure, I think this exhibition wouldn't be made possible without my colleague and dear friend, Shaurya Kumar, who's the curator. As Jitesh mentioned, Shaurya is an associate professor at the School of the Art Institute and the chair of the Department of Printmedia. He is an active curator, an educator, of course, and first and foremost, a contemporary artist exhibiting his work locally and internationally. So welcome, Shaurya. Thank you for joining us. In addition, we will be speaking with 𝐒𝐮𝐫𝐚𝐻 Saraf, a media artist, composer, and founder of the Center for Emotional Materiality. 𝐒𝐮𝐫𝐚𝐻's practice lives at the intersection of technology, healing, and activism. She was a 2019 technology resident at Pioneer Works, a wonderful residency program in Brooklyn, New York, and a 2020 resident at Harvest Works in New York as well. 𝐒𝐮𝐫𝐚𝐻 is based in Brooklyn, New York at the moment. And just a few other kind of shout outs here. 𝐒𝐮𝐫𝐚𝐻 has exhibited her work widely within the US and internationally. She has received a number of awards recently, including the Eureka Fellowship Award, as well as presented her work at art biennials, exhibitions across the US really widely. So very happy to invite you to join the conversation today. Thank you both for being here.
Thank you so much.
So to begin, Shaurya, I would like to turn to you. As we mentioned, Emerge is the inaugural exhibition at NIAM at a new museum. So there's a lot of kind of new things happening here. But I want to just invite you to talk to us. What was the concept? What was your idea behind this group exhibition featuring 9 contemporary artists with roots and links to India? How did you think about making a group show like this now feel really fresh and vibrant in the context of all of the group shows that we've seen over the last decades? So where did the show idea come from?
Thank you, Megha. No, it's been a pleasure to work with NIAM as well over the last couple of years now. And I would say that the idea of this exhibition somewhat predated me as a curator as well. I think this is something that when NIAM was in the process of establishing a physical space, I believe that the decision was made that an exhibition of contemporary Indian diaspora and showcasing their work would be a right first step into establishing the identity of NIAM in a physical space, which I would, as I have in the last 2 years, and I would continue to do so, would congratulate NIAM to take such a bold step. I think it was a challenging step. It was a growing and evolving conversation that happened throughout the process. And of course, I was honored by the invitation to do that exhibition as well. Now, I think when NIAM had approached me, they had approached me with this very broad idea, a very sort of abstract idea of what an exhibition should be about. And I think the conversation expanded and really sort of grew deeper as we started to respond to what was happening within the United States and around the world, of how important it was to have this conversation at this particular moment, right? After the census of 2020, we also saw that India was a very healthy, and Indian diaspora was a very healthy and growing population as well. There's well over 44 million Indian Americans, currently in this country, making about 3% of the population. And there's no better way to tell their story than through art, and particularly to contemporary art, where people of this generation, of younger generation, as they're migrating to the US for various different contexts and narratives, are able to respond to their current state of being, whether it's political or social or personal. And all the 9 artists have taken a very personalized and a very unique approach in expressing that complexity, not necessarily focusing strictly on the issues of identity, as often the diaspora conversation is expected to be, but rather to talk about how sort of this multi-site and multi-identity narrative start to play into the context of their practice.
Great.
So I would maybe also just add that there are several artists in the exhibition who have made site-specific works for the museum, and so specifically in response to not only the conversations we had, but also to the space and and the museum site, geographical site, and the physical space itself. So it's a very exciting exhibition, and I hope most of you get to see it in person.
I appreciate that real focus on the fact that this exhibition couldn't have happened at any time prior. It's really very responsive to this moment. And as you said, the kind of current and very evolving state of what the Indian diaspora kind of culture, artistic production, and kind of questions, political questions are today. And so I appreciate that that was an interest of yours to make this invitation for artists to really address that. Can you just speak briefly about how did you make a selection? There's so many exciting artists working within the US today. Some of them, like 𝐒𝐿, have passed through Chicago where we both live, but many others don't have that. How do you, I guess, just how do you think as a curator about where those, what to include and what not to include?
Yeah, and as you know, curating exhibitions yourself as well, I think that's the most difficult part, because we have a growing and an incredibly strong group of artists, Indian Americans or Indian diasporic artists within the country. There were a few things that I was sort of interested in when I was looking at the artist. One, that I wanted all the 9 artists to be as diverse as possible, right? In terms of their media that they work, the kind of content they have. There are works which are almost trending towards the ideas of social practice, engaging the current politics and the current state of not only the US, but also sort of the world, almost in a way, ranging to somebody's work, which is very poetic and very sort of self-introspective as well. So that was, the diversity was one. The other was extending the diversity. I wanted the works to be works themselves and the artists to be as inclusive as possible as well. So conversations talking about not from a particular lens, but to have as kaleidoscopic lens as possible, right? As diverse as possible, looking at different aspects of what a diaspora means, not just Indian diaspora, but a diaspora means. All the 9 artists, as you mentioned in example of 𝐒𝐿, are internationally acclaimed and exhibiting artists. So thinking about them from the perspective of an artist in a globalized society, really international practice, but then at the same time, they are not bound by, although they very much acknowledge and appreciate their identities of coming from India as well. So it's very difficult to narrow that list. But then at the same time, my biggest hope is that this is the first exhibition which would expand that conversation. So it was not so much about limiting the exhibition to 9 artists, but taking the first step with these 9 and then expanding that conversation further. So I'm sure that we'll celebrate the remaining diaspora or the growing population of diaspora in the ongoing programmings and exhibitions at the site as well.
Thank you. One more question for you. As I mentioned, curatorial practice is an important part of your broader artistic practice. You're an educator as well, and you're, as an artist, you work with print, you work with installation, sculpture, really cross-disciplinarily. Can you just speak a bit about how these pieces fit together? I think sometimes we really think of these roles as isolated and separate, but you do them very fluidly, and they all, I think, inform each other. How do these roles kind of work together for what you think of as your art practice?
I would say that even when I was, when I was sort of brainstorming about the exhibition, when I was looking at the possible artists for the exhibition, and maybe 𝐒𝐿 could echo that or contradict me on that, but I was having a conversation with them as a fellow artist as well, a diasporic artist who have gone through those very conversations, or rather through those preconceptions as well of what it means to be an Indian American artist. So I think that conversation was very much the forefront of what the curatorial philosophy for this exhibition was. And I think being a practicing artist made me understand very quickly, maybe, and have more intimate conversations about one's practice. I would also say that a majority of the artists in the exhibition, they're all, of course, Indian diaspora, but were hesitant to either some extent or to a greater extent about, again, that bracketing or the preconception of what a diasporic artist should be and should practice as. And I feel my own practice very much echoed with the similar concerns or objections to that preconceptions. And I feel that started a good conversation already. So I can't imagine being a practicing artist without being in a classroom as well, because it's those conversations that keep us going, right? That you talk to a diverse set of population of students on which through articulation you get inspired to go back into the practice as well. So I think they're sort of very embedded within each other. They're very symbiotic in a way. So
right, I think that's true. And I really appreciate this idea that this show can happen again and again in different ways and really keep responding to what this question is. I worked on an exhibition like 15 years ago in Chicago, one of the early exhibitions of kind of contemporary art from India, narrative art, that happened at the Cultural Center in 2007. And there's been many waves of what a group exhibition exploring these questions can be. And I think we've really come to a place where artists do derive a sense of community from being part of this dialogue, inclusive of these different perspectives, where people are geographically, where they are also in kind of in terms of an immigrant experience. And the work reflects that. So I think it just continues to be more nuanced and deeper. And it's important for us to keep coming together and refining this conversation, what it is to be part of this culture in the US now. Thank you. So Survi, moving to you, we have the benefit of experiencing a work of yours, a video work from 2010 called Fold, which is inside the exhibition, installed there. This work is included in the show, and maybe we'll begin with this. This work was from a number of years ago, but a kind of a seminal work in your practice and important work in the exhibition. I'll invite you to share an excerpt of the video and then we can talk about it.
Okay, sure, thank you. I'll share my screen and start there and then we'll move on. Is it okay if I show the whole work?
Please, go for it. It's about a 7-minute video. Yeah.
Yeah. I just want to add that the sound in the video is kind of really subtle. So, if you're wearing headphones, you can just try to adjust the volume, or if there's on the laptop too, you can try to adjust the volume a little bit. It's very subtle and quiet in most part.
Thank you for showing that work. It's wonderful to see it in its entirety. Of course, a distinct experience to see it in the installation in the context of an exhibition. But in this work, Fold, we see you in multiple, pixelated across the screen, folding clothes which undulate before us. Tell us about this work. Where did it come about?
Yeah, so this was the first work I made after moving to San Francisco from Chicago after my grad school, after finishing my grad school. And yeah, it came about, I guess, from me just wanting to be present in this life and trying to do this thing that I really did not enjoy doing growing up at all, which was folding clothes. So, you know, I had just moved to San Francisco and I was trying to find my footing in this new city and kind of just like, where do I belong? And I was spending a lot of time at home, just, you know, just being immersed in just like domestic life and feeling like, all right, how can I be present here? And this is something that I was interested in before too, to like take a mundane moment from our lives and kind of use that as a portal to create a meditative, transformative experience. So I think that's where I was, you know, trying to hone in that moment and like be present in that life. Be staying with that uncomfortable like feeling of, you know, the uncertainty and the anxiety of like being in a new city, but also just being in that space of like wanting to create from that place. So yeah, I guess that's where, you know, that's how it started.
You mentioned your graduate program where you studied at the School of the Art Institute. You studied art and technology and were interested in the intersection of those two things from, you know, for a very long time. It's been an important part of your practice.
Right.
It's so interesting to me to think of an activity and an action like folding clothing, which is like the most analog of processes. It's something you, as far as we know, I could be wrong, to automate this. I don't know that we've done that yet. I don't know if we've gotten there. So
I read there are folding clothes robots out there that do that for you.
We've arrived at the Jetsons fantasy. Okay, so we're there. But the process itself is so, you know, tactile and haptic and hands-on. And this video that you've made, it seems to kind of balance these elements of a digital medium, but this very kind of tactile process, and even the way you use color, the way that your palette evolves over the course of the video, there's something kind of painterly about it, I think. How did you envision it to be a video always, or was there some other form of this that you kind of explored for it to be something that could happen in real life or something performative? There's also, of course, an important element of performance within the video as well.
Right. So it was first envisioned as a video for sure. And later on, it did turn into a live performance, actually, where I invited a whole bunch of volunteers to just fold clothes at like really, really, really slow speed. So it would take them like, 40 minutes to like fold 5 items or 10 items, like really slowly. So a lot of my work is about like, kind of slowing down and being present and kind of, looking inward to gain perspective about the life that we live. And embodiment is like, the kind of like the central tool that I use to explore these themes that I'm interested in. So the tactileness of the fabric and like the voice that I'm singing, like, my voice, the singing voice, all of those elements are very much kind of where I start. And then the camera kind of almost becomes like this mirror of, getting a outside view of my own life and then having that perspective. So it's, into that moment. So it creates that separation that I sometimes almost try to gain through meditation, like, where you kind of see yourself like in this space, in this reality. So it becomes a very tactile tool for that. Yeah. So, and then certainly, having a background in painting and as in like I did my bachelor's in painting. has something to do with the way that, you know, it ends up looking so painterly. But also I grew up, you know, learning Indian classical music and dance and choreography and movement. So all of these elements are like really big part of my practice, even now. So even though this work is like, you know, almost 12, 13 years old, now 12 years old, I guess, yeah. I primarily see myself as like a choreographer in my head, where I am putting together all these different elements, whether it's like my activism, or it is, you know, the sound, or it's movement, or it is, you know, the different forms of technology that I engage with. Like all these different elements are constantly, you know, kind of like one medium takes the foreground, and then it like disappears, and then, you know, takes the backstage and front stage, and it's very much like a, you know, movement-based embodied practice that I kind of is central to the way I work.
Right. Thank you for that. It's really wonderful to hear your own background in all of these different areas. It's really so rich. You talked about dance and music, so performance combined with painting, your interest in digital technologies, and then kind of overlaid by this interest in embodiment and kind of seeking to be in the present. And all of these are very much at play in this work. It's quite subtle, but I did want to ask you about the soundtrack. You know, you hear your voice humming a tune, but it's much more than just that. There's that kind of amplified effects. There's an echoing that mirrors, kind of orally mirrors the image that you see, the increasing pixelation on the screen. So can you talk about how you formed that soundtrack? Was it something that you thought of as interwoven with the video, or did you create it after to kind of weave it in?
Right. It was very much interwoven as part of the video, like, because this was the second video in a series I was calling these video choreographies. So the first video I made was called Peel, in which I was cooking. And then that was definitely a much more like intense sound experience. It was installed, it was like my MFA piece in Chicago, and it was installed in like, you know, surround sound. And, you know, so every time I would cut something, like the sound of the knife would like get multiplied into these 96 like little, you know, these patterns essentially, and this very immersive abstract soundscape that you know, that was created. So certainly that work was getting carried on, like those ideas were getting carried on in this work, because it essentially uses the same like 96 little video grid. And then here, of course, like I had you know, using the action and using the video as the source of the sound was certainly like, you know, I wanted to retain that very much, because again, it is very much tied to this like embodied material. Like a lot of the sounds I always use are very like tactile in material. So like I often, you know, for later on in my more like recent compositions, if I'm using a sound of like, you know, a glass breaking, I would literally break it and record it, as opposed to just like finding a sample somewhere. So it's very gesture, it's very like body based. So that's how the sound for this work was also composed. You know, like recording myself and then just like repeating it and creating those like subtle textures to kind of give it that, you know, feeling. But yeah.
A richness, absolutely, and a fullness. So you've mentioned your current work a few times. I do want to make sure that we can talk about that, because I feel that this work from 12 years ago has so many of the elements that really have carried through to some of the projects that you're really engaged with now. So I would like to invite you to talk about those. You are very kind of committed at the moment to exploring the impact of digital technologies on our lives, on our bodies, of social media, on ourselves. So thinking about the impact on the world, but really rooted in their impact on our individual experiences, so our own emotions, our body. And I really do see Fold as kind of a precursor to these preoccupations for you. So can you tell us a little bit about what are you working on now? And how are you manifesting these questions in this exploration?
Right. I guess before I show something, I'll just like give a little bit of a more of a background, like, because a lot of time has passed. And I think over the years, I have definitely become more and more interested in like that idea of embodiment, taking that into like, the psychosomatics of like how most things, like most experiences that we feel in our body are like psychosomatic experiences, or like most, one thing that I have been more and more interested in is this idea of healing. And when you're engaging with this idea of healing, you have to kind of attend to the wound. And the wound that I was more interested in, again, like looking at the effects of digital technologies on our bodies, and like the things that we don't really see, that we don't really like, the thoughts and the emotions that turn into behaviors that we don't, they're not like as visible, that making those like, kind of tangible and visible is one of my interests over time that has grown. And
can you give an example of that? Would you mind more specifically?
An example of?
How do the emotions or these kind of experiences using these, these tools become behavioral? Or what, can you describe a little more what the kind of, what this wound looks like, or where it comes from?
I think the wound is like multi-layered, because, I'm, when I look at like technology, I don't just see it as like, our phones. First, I'll talk about like the more tangible material wound, how I see it. So, when I'm looking at a phone and I'm looking at, I've been very interested in like, the materiality of the phone itself. Like, and our phone is this very slick piece of technology that like, looks like, the data lives in the cloud. We all like, it has this kind of very disembodied kind of feel that, like all our lives are there, but like it's somewhere else. And it also feels very disconnected from its source. Right, which is the earth, like, because our phones are made of all the minerals and metals, and these elements, they come from the earth. So in a more tangible, tactile way, I see that as like the site of a mine, where these minerals and metals are mined, as the physical wound on earth. But then you kind of translate that to the psychosomatic side of it, like, there is this kind of like growing sense of like, fear of missing out, for example. Like that's a very common like symptom of feeling that comes from like being on social media, right? Like, so that these fears that we feel, or like the anxiety that you feel of like constantly being on the go, or the restlessness of just being on the internet, that it's just such a restless place, right? So I think all of these, we don't always even have the names for the new kind of like feelings and emotions that we haven't quite articulated into our psyche, because the environment and the digital world changes so rapidly and so quickly. And so that's why this act of like slowing down and kind of like really looking at what is going on in our bodies, like how do we make kin with our bodies, and in that process make kin with the people around us, and then the environment. And that kind of, I see that all very interconnected, and also where my interest lies the most right now. But there's another kind of like the story, like a more personal story, how I got to making the work I'm making right now, which is, which comes from more of my like the Indian identity, like the Indian body that I have, giving a birth to an American child, and then just feeling that disconnect of like, all right, what part of my past do I want to like pass on? Like what part of my beliefs do I want to pass on? And what do I like, don't want to have to like, how do I take the good and like leave the bad? And then I think, religion was one of the things that I struggled with like all my life. And I remember feeling very moved by the rituals, and like, by all the dancing and the singing, and like the festival, the celebratory part of like religious events throughout growing up in a family, in the religious Hindu family. And yet, like the patriarchal kind of narratives and the oppression of patriarchy, like I just could not like stand and spend most of my time like, staying away from it. And like, I just couldn't quite like figure out what was the significance of this thing that clearly is very important to me and my family. I mean, sorry, not me, but my family and like the world I'm part of. But what is the true like, meaning and significance? I've always been kind of, I have this like, this fundamental urge to get to the bottom of things. Like where is this really coming from?
The
right?
root. Yeah.
What's the root? And so there was this kind of, the event of like, giving birth to my son had a big impact. And then at the same time, I had also been living in Silicon Valley for 10 years and being very much immersed in the tech scene where like all our friends are like, they all work in the tech, and I'm married to somebody who works in the tech. But also just seeing this kind of ideology at the time, like, this techno-solutionism, like techno-capitalist kind of like the world that we live in, but specifically techno-solutionism as like being the ideology that drove so much of like, you can call it the innovation. And then, of course there is innovation, but also just like problems, like we don't necessarily need.
What do you mean by techno-solutionism? Can you define that?
I think the very simple way to talk about it is that any problem there is, like there's always a technological solution for it, like that mindset. And so when I, in 2015, 2016, right before like around that election time, and you're seeing like the effects of Facebook and the anxiety overall, like it's actually socio-political impact of like what the social media technologies were doing to our perception of reality, essentially, right? Like what we were, and to our sense of truth and beliefs, like all of that kind of added to this feeling of like, I don't know what to really believe in. I just felt so disillusioned for so long. And I was like, and then I spent so much time just, being part of like activist groups and like doing all this, just kind of directing my energies towards doing like more activism type work ever since the election. So I think all of these things were happening. There's the Silicon Valley ideology that I was wanting to challenge and understand where it's coming from. There's like the need to kind of find a deeper connection with my past. And then, and what was the third thing? And now I'm forgetting myself.
Yeah, your work kind of in collective organizing and thinking about our kind of broader context politically.
Right. So between all of this, I just felt like that suddenly I needed to also be, not suddenly, but like I think also be curious and like have a say in the future. Like I wanted a place in that future, which was being imagined for me for us by big corporations and companies, and especially tech companies that, so I was just feeling like, okay, what would I do? Like, what would I want to say if I had a say, in this scene? And so that's where I created this work. I'll share my screen and share a small part of it. So in 2018, like I came up with this idea of like this techno-utopian myth of 𝐒𝐿𝐴woken. It is an ongoing multimedia project that includes, video sculpture, VR experience, series of live performance, short films, and a concept album. So it's a pretty like, broad spectrum of things that I'm hoping to do with this. But I came up with this a mythical artificial emotional intelligence, which is called 𝐒𝐿𝐴woken. It's made of all the minerals and metals that go into the making of our phones and different technologies, and lives in the digital sphere. And yeah, it kind of embodies that alchemical materiality of the earth, and it lives as this healer, companion, and a new form of divination to the people who believe in it, which are the awakened. And so I was kind of like starting to build this, world building of these two sides, whereas there's the technology and the people who believe in this technology. Yeah, so what we're looking at here is a video sculpture, and there's this blob, which is awoke, and it kind of goes through these two screens, another screen on the, there's one more screen on the other side, and then.
Surbhi, I'm sorry, we don't see your video yet. We could hear the sound, but not see it.
Oh my God, I'm so sorry.
Well, I could see it. You couldn't, Shorya? I could see it.
No, I could not. I'm not sure if others are.
Did anybody else see it?
I did see it.
Okay, then it must be something on my end then, sorry.
Oh, okay.
So this form, you've created this sculpture with a video component, and the idea is that this sculpture is comprised of the minerals and elements that are found and derived from the earth that power our phones to do the technology that's needed.
Right.
So you're kind of creating a new form for these materials to live in. And can you just describe what is the, it's utilizing current technologies to help us do something? What is the impact of it on someone who comes near this sculpture? Or what's your hope there? How does it promote healing or promote a different way of being?
I mean, I think that it's part of the story. So right now, like I think overall, what I expected to do for the viewers, I think it'll be very different. Like, for each person, it's going to be different. But I think eventually, once it's seen through its fruition, I hope it will, like, once it has the sound component of it, because the new version of it is going to be an audiovisual instrument, and so it can kind of like kind of activate our like parasympathetic like nervous system, and to calm our nervous system down, and kind of create that space where we can expand and slow down at the same time. So that's a much more broader kind of experience that I can say for like audience members and viewers as of now, because this is very much in progress. But in the world of awoken, for awoken, it does like it does emotional labor, and it helps them cope with anxieties. And so the way this happens is like it is more of an instigator than like actually doing the healing. Just like how medicines, like I think our bodies heal themselves. Like our bodies have much more power to regenerate themselves than like we give them credit for, right? So I think that's where this is going.
Yes.
And it's not meant to be like a healer in the more like like you take a pill and it's going to do something.
Yes, like something to solve the problem. We will transition shortly to a Q&A, but I would love for you, Surbhi, to really help this idea expand a bit more, to share one more short video. But I understand that, I mean, I think that's the role and place of art in our culture and society, to envision and imagine other ways of thinking about solutions to the problems that we see, and imagine them without the sorry, there's some banging happening in my house. To envision them outside of the constraints of what we know is possible and what we know has been done before. That's really the purpose. So I do want to just ask you, you have a really particular vision of how this object can be kind of shared, and how you would invite people into it. Would you please just share a video of how you activate it? Because that, I think, speaks very much to what you're describing, how it can, in practice, be this instigator and invitation for people to think differently or feel slightly differently.
is that okay if I ask you, like, are you talking about the last video?
The last video, yes.
Performing? Yeah, okay.
Yes.
Okay, cool. Just wanted to make sure. Yeah. So this one, this is me performing live as the first awakened, and kind of evoking the genesis of Awoke through atmospheric sound explorations. And, you know, this is a short version of that video, of this performance, but once this performance is like, you know, kind of this work is more done, I guess, it's going to be an evening length performance that has, you know, the dancers coming in, and that's immersive video will kind of be part of it. But I'll play it now. That's it.
Thank you. I think that provides a really nice way of how you envision activating the work and activating a space with an audience. And I think anything that has your voice and your singing and vocals, the better from my perspective. So yeah, just to say that it's a really beautiful perspective into kind of critiquing, I think, kind of how technology operates in our world right now, because your view is not very pessimistic. It's actually quite, I think of it as optimistic, that there's ways to utilize and deploy the technology in a way, thoughtful way, intentional way that can serve us better, maybe.
Right. That's not exploitative of our inner lives and the environment, essentially.
So from here, thank you so much. We'll just transition to taking a couple of questions from people who are joining us today. I know there have been a few questions that have been put into the chat. I hope we addressed most of those. If anyone has additional questions, feel free to put them into the chat here. And then maybe just to kick it off, if Shaurya or Jitesh has anything initially that they'd like to pose, we can begin with that.
I would invite Shaurya, actually. Shaurya, do you have a question for Surabhi?
No, I would maybe just at least echo or acknowledge a couple of questions that came up in the chat. And I think, Surabhi, it's you and I can jointly answer it if needed be. But, you know, as you know, that this work was from 2010, the work at NIAM. So one question is that it was exhibited 12 years later. So one is that, how do you feel about that when you are now showcasing back to, of course, a newer audience in a new museum? And then how that is, in a lot of ways, still very relevant. In fact, that was a conversation of how relevant it is for these particular last 20 months that we have been experiencing. So would you like to maybe say something about that, of the context of the show and context of the times that it's being exhibited now?
Yeah, strangely, like I didn't, you know, I mean, I've spent so much time with that work and it's been shown around so much. And I'm like, of course, I want to, you know, I'm so immersed in the new work for the past 3 years. And I was like, why are we showing this? But I'm glad you did convince me, because, you know, it has come up in other conversations too, that how I think that the central idea of that inward looking, it's still very much relevant. And I do feel that, like, you know, even when I was making the work in 2010, one thing I knew for sure that I wanted to have this very like, universal kind of feeling that, that anybody could connect with it. And I knew I was like, I don't want it to be, I don't want that to come at the risk of like, kind of watering down who I am and like my identity and my work and the ideas. Because, a lot of times like the very kind of universal works can take away the personal and just make it like very, blanket in that way. So I'm just happy to see that it still resonates, to be honest. That's, yeah.
Yeah, no, and I think that's the reason why I thought that while I love the work and the direction that you have moved on since then, I thought that this was just a moment that in a way sort of puts an exclamation mark on the last 20 months, right? On to the point where in the beginning, if it was not COVID, for example, this work would be read in a certain way, which is still very relevant, but possibly it would be read as a perspective of a woman, particularly, like, you being the protagonist. But I think that conversation has shifted a little bit. So it's a little bit more democratic, like the fact that everybody's lens is now pointing inwards into people's homes and personal lives, right? You hear the kids screaming, you hear the banging happening downstairs, but also to the point where there's no separation between what is personal and what is professional, right? And I think that in that inversion that happened, I think is something which is, celebrated in this work, right? It is talking about a moment which is probably, definitely mundane, but now where every moment is almost a Groundhog Day. Like it's that continuous recursion that happens, and that recursive conversation which is embedded in the DNA of technology is beautifully materialized in the video, right? Without it being, well, it could be infinite in a way, it is, but the moment of it is that you're walking away, but it starts all over again. So I think sort of that recursive mode, that infinite parallel mode, I think was something which I was very relevant to the last 20 months. And I was sort of happy to see you be open to
Right.
including that work in the show.
Right. Right.
I want to bring in like a couple of just logistical questions, for those of us who are new to audiovisual art. And I see Tamara actually asked those questions. How did you decide how many images, like how many panels would there be? Is there a method to the madness, or do you just flow with it?
Right. So I think definitely that was a very conscious choice to go with the 96, because I actually, when I tested, I started with like 8 and I went up to 400. And then I found that 96 was like just the right number for like, when I imagined it like where it will be installed most of the time, the size I wanted it to be installed most of the time, that each image, like you can still see the individual image for what it is, but you just like, if you remove yourself just further enough, you can see the bigger kind of. So I think that like being able to see, zoom in and out at a pace where both are relevant, both images like are relevant, was a very conscious choice. So yeah.
Another one of those logistical questions is, is there anybody behind the camera usually, or is it just a camera setup? You just do it by yourself?
Yeah, it's just on a tripod.
And you prefer it that way, even if help is available, I assume? Yeah.
I recorded it like a million times. Like I folded a lot of clothes. so I think, it is. I just wanted it to be very natural feeling
that's going to be the motivation.
I ended up choosing the most like where I just totally was unaware of the camera as much as possible.
Right. The next time I slack on my chores, I'm just going to put a camera and creating some art. One question from Raja here is, could you please talk about the music? I know you have addressed some of the music behind the work, but like what leads you to kind of add your own voice to it, and what kind of background music you're selecting? is that a conscious choice also, or does that have any relevance to the video, to the visual in itself, or is it just something that's relevant to you?
I think it's more relevant to me. It is the conscious choices of like the way I compose it all together. But in the moment, I want to like keep it very intuitive and fluid into like what I'm feeling in the moment, and just kind of hum the songs that I want. And I, of course, like later on when in the second half of the video, where there are multiple songs that are coming in that I'm humming, like almost 6, 7 songs. And at that time I did have to kind of, put them together in a way that they were all audible at different times. So that was like a little bit of sound editing engineering work. But musically, I do, feel that the sound and the music practice that carries through in all of my projects, like whether it is a performance or a video installation or a workshop, like anything I do, like sound is an integral part of it. And it really kind of captures the essence of the art I want to make. Like it has the capacity to, touch us and like affect us at this very deep emotional kind of level that I feel like, the final, even the final outcome of this new project, the 𝐒𝐻𝐻𝐾𝐚 project that has so many different things going on, the part I'm most excited about is the concept album, which is where we'll bring it all together. Because in the last 2 years, like, when I went very inward, like kind of took a break from art making, what came up for me is that I need to make music to be like, that is what like truly, fulfills my soul and spirit, and like it really has that. And so that's most enjoyable experience for me as an artist. So it's there in everything.
Absolutely. I know there are a lot of other questions, but we are running out of time. I want to end this by asking a quick question to Shaurya, actually. Is when you are approaching audiovisual art to include in an exhibition, do you approach them as a standalone, or is there, again, a method to your madness where you are kind of seeing if it flows with the rest of, for example, the art in the image exhibition?
I think the audiovisual work or any other work starts to change in context of when you put in an exhibition. What work is around it, how it's surrounded by it, how it interacts with it. There are 9 distinct artists in the exhibition with very distinct practice, but at the same time, they're having conversation with each other, right? And it's a sort of a very open floor plan of the museum itself. And whichever point you're standing in the show, you're interacting with not only the work which is right in front of you, but peripherally as well with others. And so it's important to consider the context, right? The installation of it, the presentation is not just of an isolated work. It's always in a context of that. But in the case of Surbhi films, for example, it needed to be of a certain scale for it to be experienced properly. And of course, there are moments in other artists' artwork upstairs, right, on the main floor, where the works needed to be a little bit more silent and not to be interrupted by the sound and the music. So I think through the process of what would reflect the work best, where it is experienced the best possible way, the gallery downstairs, where both Surbhi's video and also Kuldeep's video is something that, like, that wall and that space that echoes very well. It could be darkened quite nicely as well to have the film very saturated, was the best solution possible. Yeah, but I think it depends upon the work. Some needs to be right interfered and be inclusive with the others. Some needs to be in a black box for them to be experienced as standalone pieces. So I think for Surbhi's, I was glad to see where it was, and I think it works well. I hope Surbhi gets to see it before the show comes down. But
absolutely. Thank you so much, Shaurya. And I hope for our audience today, that evokes the curiosity to actually come to the museum and check out the art and see what Shaurya is actually talking about, the rest of the artwork, and how Surbhi's work kind of fits in. And I'm excited for you all to experience that conversation between these artists and their work in the museum space itself. I want to thank special thanks to 𝐿𝐵𝐵𝐵 today for being such a wonderful and gracious host. Thank you so much for joining us today. Obviously, special thanks to Surbhi. And I really did not see that other video coming in, and it just really took me by surprise. And is there any way our audience can kind of look at those videos later on? Can I include those links later on?
Yeah, they're all available like on my website, and yeah, the newest version of it should be up there too soon, because that we haven't seen yet, but yeah.
Wonderful. I will include those links in a follow-up email, and we can never run out of our thanks and gratitude for Shaurya for kind of spearheading the whole exhibition, but also staying by our side as we navigate through our first inaugural exhibition. Thank you so much, Shaurya.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you,
The
Jitesh.
audience, absolutely. To the audience, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you so much for trusting us again. There is a link in the chat with the donation link. Please consider making a small donation from $10 to, we will take your $100 bills. Please consider supporting us through this project. We try to keep our events free of charge, but any amount of money that we receive will be going into organizing events like these, so we can bring contemporary Indian American artists to the forefront and bring them the exposure that they truly deserve, along with experts and curators and commenters like 𝐒𝐵𝐵𝐵 and Shaurya here. Thank you so much for considering to donate. That donation link will also be in your email. I will not let go until I see some donations, so you're going to see some follow-up emails as well. Thank you so much for joining us. I hope you will come.
Jitesh,
yeah.
I'm sorry, just one thing, maybe a small announcement about the rest of the programming that's coming as well would be helpful.
Yes, thank you for reminding me that. Yes, there are so many other programs coming in. Actually, Shaurya just reminded me, there is another program, another virtual program that's coming up in February. I will include those links as well as soon as the tickets are up. Another panel discussion with more artists, with more guest curators. We have a Gandhi Peace program that's going to be at the museum space. So there are a lot of 𝐒𝐿 exhibition related arts programs that are in the works for the next month. One for this month as well. I will send all those links, and I hope you will participate and support us just like today. Yeah, so please consider donating. Please consider joining for the other events. The next one is on February 13th, and I will send you those links. Thank you so much for joining us and spending your Sunday morning with us. With that, I want to sign off, and thank you very much. Thank you to our panelists today.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jitesh. Thank you, 𝐒𝐵𝐵𝐵. Thank you, Surbhi.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.